well-written graduate essay, I would expect that the student has read through, that he masters the subject, that he can get a reader through an essay, depending on the length, without getting lost on the way. So I think that would be very important for me for a good essay. This is a very difficult issue, the introduction. A lot of people get lost already in the introduction. So either it's the student himself or herself finds a good question and then continues from there, or manages to get the larger picture and then show what part of this larger picture they're going to work on. And so the introduction shows more or less whether the student is able to frame his or her own question properly. So, yeah. Conclusion is something very interesting to me, because you will immediately see whether you're dealing with a student from the Anglo-Saxon world or from the Russian world, or I mean the post-Soviet world, because there a conclusion is supposed to give advices. So you get from an academic question to a political advice. So latest by then you know what kind of students you have. So this is something I'm working with students to see, like, what do we expect, what not, and what is an academic tradition. And while the introduction is more or less the same, the conclusion can be very different. So a good conclusion, I think there's no one answer. It really depends on the academic tradition. For us here in Europe, I think a good conclusion needs to conclude the whole idea, and we do not expect students to get further in this discussion to give advices. The question of mistakes, I think, is difficult, because what is a mistake? First of all, I think in academic there is no mistake. There's just different ways to think. For English academic writing, I'm not an expert in English, so I would leave that question rather to specialists. From content, I like to think along with students and then to understand why they think like that. So there's no mistake per se. There's just different ways to think of an idea, and this could be something to discuss then. Or, yeah. I always try to listen to them first, because if you have a subject you like, you'll do it well. If you just do a subject or question that your teacher wants, yeah, you might not get the same results. And then we work out along the capacity of the student, depending on the resources, the languages, the time frame, and so on. And then we see what is possible, and so on. So I try to work from the capacity of a student rather than top down. This is my approach. This is one of the most difficult ways to deal with students who are very enthusiastic and would like to write a whole book or in one essay. And usually I work with examples where I show them, say, I mean, this is another example where somebody tried to solve the world in one essay. And this is predefined to fail. And then to see, like, what would be the larger picture and what is realistic to work on. And again, I try to work with the student and also to give examples of where I think it failed. I think there's more difference within the journals and within students than between students and journals. We have excellent students and they write really beautifully. And even if the article or the essay is not an article yet, so and they're extremely bad journal articles. So, yeah, I think there is more difference within than among. Yeah, so, I mean, the languages we know in Europe usually is English, French, German here, and Tajik, which is my language as an anthropologist. I do understand Russian, but I don't speak it fluently that good. And then I learned several languages, which I don't speak because I simply forgot them, I never used them. But they train to understand language systems. So I studied Mongolian, Arabic, and things like that, but I don't speak them anymore. Everything. I basically write in English, which has to do with the audience. Central Asia is a very small field, so the readership in other languages is so small that, yeah, and I got used to write in English, so I keep doing that. The most difficult is to certify foreign English speakers, because I found that like native English speakers, they're much more tolerant to various ways of speaking, while foreigners who speak English, they have one variation, and this is the main one. So for example, since I have some Belgian roots or some French speaking roots, I happen to speak more in a French way, which a German will never hear when I speak German. So when I write, I somehow get into a Frenglish rather than a German English. And my German colleagues who speak English, they're the worst enemies for me because they can't stand my English. They'll always start picking on this English. So I think for foreigners it's difficult because English is a lingua franca, and it's not a native language. So I prefer to work with native speakers. They're much more tolerant, and they immediately find where somebody comes from or not. It's much more interesting. First of all, the audience, because there's lots of people who will read that, and you speak to a large public, and this is nice. And I wish I could speak more to native speakers and improve that, because I think sometimes when I read a really beautiful book, it's really enjoying. So I wish I could write like that. They're working so closely together, so I'm not sure whether I could separate them. So I published with Berkhan Publisher, and it has been really nice work. But I got a lot of support for editing. So any institute I went to, they really emphasized to give good support and good advice and everything. So it really depends on the editing. But a good editing is really expensive. So it's worth the investment, I think, but a lot of people save there. And this is immediately, you can see that immediately. And publishers don't care always the same way. So there are, for books, they do care. For journal articles, sometimes they don't care. And I have one article where I'm very unhappy because they did not care. And I thought they would care. So their expectation and the product somehow didn't fit. And I'm not happy about this.
Okay. And maybe just as a final sort of, if you don't, it's fine. Do you have any final sort of advice or suggestion for students who are writing from a non-native background at master's level?
If they really want to write in English, they should invest in language. That we cannot go around. Or it's just for their studies and they'll later on write primarily in their own language, then it's just a lingua franca. If they really want to write in future, it's worth a big investment, which is often not given in the institutions or in the universities, but which I would definitely advise to start as soon as possible.